Hi, welcome to White Women Wake Up. I'm Janelle.
And I'm Karen.
Each week, one of us brings a topic to the table, something we've been wrestling with, reading about, or noticing in our own lives.
And the other reacts in real time, no scripts, no prep, just honest intergenerational conversation about what it means to wake up as white women in a world shaped by bias, power, and inherited patterns.
We don't always agree, and it's not always comfortable, but we show up anyways. Let's wake up. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Janelle. Hey, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I've been thinking about the topic we had last week, and the topic about what?
Food segregation.
Or food apartheid.
Mostly known as food deserts to people.
Yeah, mostly.
Politically known as food apartheid, but now on this podcast, known as systematic food segregation.
So actually, I have to be honest, my reflection probably has more to do with the topic I am going to be bringing up.
I mean, that's okay.
But my
reflection last week was about traffic.
One of the things that I really appreciate that you were asking us to do last week was to look at a topic like food deserts and realize that labeling is actually inaccurate and that it actually points to blaming people rather than
blaming the
or not blaming, but
not just
blaming
people,
the victim.
Blaming the victim.
Yeah, because a desert happens naturally as opposed to
apartheid or segregation, which is systematic.
And so I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, again, why language matters.
Yeah.
Right? Why language?
Yeah.
Because when you start to see it the way that you're talking about it as a system, maybe I'd get involved with my voting. Maybe I'd get involved with my policies, things like that. Maybe I'd get right to Trader Joe's and ask them to be in more places that are labeled food deserts. Also, like what you said with data, right? That if we actually looked at data then, we would see that there's data that supports a desire for more fresh food.
But that's the tricky part is you have to dig for that data.
Yeah.
Most data that is shown in the media, most data that's easily accessible doesn't show those data points.
Yeah.
Those are harder data points to get. And so that was kind of my point around it is like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy with data. Data, as someone who was in strategy for years, I know you can take data and make any story you want out of data, just depending on what data you find. And that's exactly what's been perpetuating is for grocery stores, for some of these outlets of there's not a need to go into these spaces. But I love what you brought up about local government because I think it is so important, especially when you're young. I know I'm guilty of this too, is not always voting or educating myself in local government and local happenings. And I think especially right now, given the political climate, there is definitely this feeling amongst youth. I know my young cousins didn't vote in elections because they don't feel like their vote really counts. They don't feel like things matter. And I've been there. But I think more importantly than anything, your local vote really counts. And getting involved locally in spaces is a great way to help uplift your community directly where you live. So I think that's a great
well, and also empowers us that we do have some opportunity to make change.
Yeah.
Okay, so my topic this week.
Hey,
and
I'm ready for it.
And it's funny because it's a topic you've talked about before, and I didn't understand its gravity in the way that it describes itself.
Okay.
And yet it describes itself like the way people are acting it out feels inauthentic.
Have me on pins and needles.
Okay. So I was listening to, recently Charlie Kirk was assassinated and it's been in the news a lot. And Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica Kirk, is now becoming the CEO or CFO of Turning Point USA, which turns out is a multi-million-dollar corporation. And it turns out, doing a lot of research about Erica Kirk, she's quite the entrepreneur. She's got a podcast. Now she's going to be running this organization. They say she's been involved in running the organization all along. And yet, she and her organization are really promoting Tradwife. Their branding what it means to be a Tradwife and what I mean by branding. And you could probably tell me more, even more
We
specifically.
definitely have talked about
Yeah, talk about it. I mean, you
phenomenon.
tell me what is the brand of a Tradwife.
So
Because
the
you brought it up.
Tradwife phenomenon, I didn't. I love that you're bringing this up because I could talk about the disconnect between feminism and Tradwives all day long. But the Tradwife phenomenon is essentially this way of going back to traditional families and traditional wives and stay-at-home moms. And in a nutshell, that sounds great. I don't think there's any disconnect from feminism to wanting to be a stay-at-home mom.
Because
I think
feminine gives you choice.
yes, because being
Yeah.
a feminist, feminism is about giving people giving women choice and the right to do what is best for their situation. However, where trad wives stray from this, from like an empowering thing, is they're more about submitting to your husbands, being submissive. They're about not really choice in the matter, but kind of being forced into it. Might be a hard word, but definitely pushed into this from societal values or political values or religious values, and so all of that is very concerning because it does take away choice and independence, and there's a big cultural push for this trad wife submissive woman.
Yeah.
And yeah. So that in a nutshell is the difference between a trad wife and just a stay-at-home mom.
Well, and one of the challenges is if you're really truly a traditional stay-at-home mom. I think about your dad's mother. She
Yes.
was a very traditional stay-at-home mom. She worked out of the house. She never worked. I mean, I don't want to say she didn't work. She worked all the time raising her kids, but she didn't work for an income. Her husband ran the show. He did the discipline. He was expected to support the family. That's a traditional.
They were a very traditional 1950s.
Yeah. Of what we
white
are
family.
saying we want these trad wives to be.
Yeah.
And yet, many of these trad wives actually are influencers, are content developers, like Erica Kirk, have a podcast.
I know many of these trad wives, the trad wives leading this movement.
Thank you. Yes, because this is like, so one of the things that they're talking about, this like when labor hides behind virtue.
Yeah.
So in other words, I
that's a
know.
good-
So in other words, they're still working.
Yes.
I mean, there is no way, like, we're busy doing this podcast that we can't even have our dogs here because it's too loud and noisy. My husband's got to daycare the dogs, right? And so there's no way they can be home with their 3 or 4 kids doing a podcast without support. Not that they can't do that, but they need support. That is not and
part of the trad wife mentality or theory is the wife does all the work. She doesn't get the support.
She doesn't get
her husband doesn't get support. She doesn't have extra help or nanny. And so again, it's really putting this woman in a position of just a lack of power.
Yeah. So one of the challenges to this, and I totally see it and why I'm concerned, is this truly honest? Or is it more about a brand and an aesthetic?
It's definitely more about
than it is. And so what then happens to these women that say, yes, I'm going to do it. And they
what are the effects?
Yeah.
What are the effects of the country?
Yeah.
I think that's so great. I mean, so what I hear you say is you are frustrated with the inauthenticity.
Yeah.
And then again, what are the downstream effects of happening to women in this society? And I think before we even go into that, I think the other thing that I've always found really interesting about trad wives too, and this thought process is majority of actually American women have never even in our history have never even been traditional wives.
Yeah.
So historically,
my grandma had to.
My grandma worked in this
making money extra. She was at home, but she
your
had to
mother
make money.
Worked in the school.
Yeah.
And so, or other women worked in factories. Other women. So even the concept of this, like, leave it to Beaver 50 housewife is still even a rare concept. So one, they're selling a pipe dream that
Yeah.
actually hasn't fully existed in the past.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of detriment to that in our society when you're selling something. Two, it's selling a lot of privilege. And so
Yeah.
again, looking back at it is a life of privilege. And I think this is where it's kind of gained a lot of popularity because of course they make it look so lovely to
Yeah.
stay at home.
It's branded.
It's branded.
It's an aesthetic branding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think,
And isn't it interesting? I didn't even go into, has it increased credit debt? Because what it means is you're not making an income anymore. So by not making your income, but you're staying at home and you want to decorate and you want to do these things, you want your kids to still look good, has it really actually increased to a credit debt? I don't know. But
well,
one of the
and I think
things,
that's hard to,
yeah,
because I think the hardest part of finding statistics around this is really separating the two of who are the women who are actually choosing and have choice to stay home. And because that is a different separate
Yeah.
topic and that is empowering and that is something we want women to continue to do if that's what they want in their life versus the women who are kind of culturally expected and almost forced to stay.
Yeah. And it's funny because even as you were pointing that out and saying we want to empower that, we also want to acknowledge that that comes with a lot of privilege.
That's what I'm saying.
Because either you have to have some sort of trust fund.
I want to empower the choice
yeah.
is what I'm saying.
You want to empower the choice.
choice.
But with that choice, there has to be some economic support in some ways, which is a privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When someone's making a choice, I like to think that they are reflecting on their current position in life.
But yeah. So anyways,
my
the
point
other
is
thing is,
want to empower
the other
choice.
thing is what concerns me, and it concerns
It more
me in a big
concerns
way.
me that this is privilege, but people are being forced into that
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's
Yeah.
I think what you're trying to
Yeah.
get into.
So according to data, $2.1 trillion in our economy is from women-owned businesses.
Right.
And they employ over 14 million workers.
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
I love that.
It's
What is
amazing.
It compared to male-owned, but
And
still.
yet, we're not giving women-owned business. If these tradwives are indeed doing podcasts,
Yeah.
or if they're indeed
we would love to celebrate their business.
we'd like to celebrate.
And not just celebrate.
And support. Like, are there different things that a woman-owned business needs differently than, because maybe they need daycare.
Step back. I don't necessarily think these trad wives who are content creators, podcasters, influencers, I don't think what you're saying is necessarily support them because I think they are clearly being supported by plenty of people. What you're trying to say is why you wish that they would be authentic.
Yeah.
So then it helps give people like voice to celebrate all female entrepreneurs.
Yes,
Okay.
Exactly. And so, for example, I'm not dissing Erica Kirk. I think it's wonderful that she has the capability, the wisdom,
the resources
to do what she's doing. I would like to celebrate her. And I would also like her to be authentic so that she tells other women, this is a lot of work. This isn't easy to manage a family and manage work. Well, I want there to be and the reason I want it to be authentic is because I feel like one of the first places we as white women can actually do justice work is by being clear with our language.
Oh, yeah.
And if we are playing into this fantasy that these trad wives that are out there influencing and content makers are not working, something is off in the way that we're defining the roles of women, if that makes sense.
Well, totally. And I mean, there's so much off. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg and how, for all of you who don't know, she was former executive at Facebook, and she wrote this book about, leaning into your career, doing everything you can, like being a mom, being everything. And then it comes to find out, and so people really got around this years later. in the book, she didn't mention her whole care team, her nanny team, her like everything. And it's creating these impossible standards to sell a brand a little bit. And and unfortunately the impacts are women then feel like they need to live up to these impossible standards because this is what we're seeing
or like
in society.
Did they choose this role as Tradwife because they are rebelling against that and yet they still have to do it? Right?
Oh.
Because, like, are they rebelling against this idea that I don't want to be a working mom because then that was really, she was being inauthentic because this is what she really has to do.
Well,
and yet we know everyone is a working woman.
In communities, and again, I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about a stay-at-home mom who is empowered in her decision. I'm talking about some of these more Tradwife circles, is a lot of them do look down on working women and that they're not good mothers. And I think so often women do get shamed for being mothers and having a working career and not they're looked at that you making that choice means that you're taking away from other aspects of your life. And I don't think that's true.
Well, one of the challenges when we don't call what it should be is, again, you talked about data, like you use this in the food apartheid last week, that we don't have accurate data because of certain things. Well, this language of invisible work. So it was titled by Kaplan in Invisible Work in the Labor Market in 2022, discusses that a certain labor is socially constructed as non-work and thus unpaid or undervalued.
Yes.
And unfortunately, most of that work goes towards women. And it does end up creating an emotional toll of unpaid labor. There's a study, The Impact of Unpaid Work on Women, Health and Well-Being, outlines how invisible domestic work leads to stress, fatigue, and diminished well-being.
Well, and adding on top of that, and I don't know, I mean, that isn't a great, I've heard about invisible work, but I haven't dug in. That's a great
I mean, I think our trad wives, especially what they called, have you heard the term trad grifter?
Yes. Yeah, explain it to me. Give him, but I really want to add on to what the invisible work. There's another theory, and I don't know the name off the top of my head, talking about home hobbies versus outside hobbies. And statistically, men's hobbies do not support kids being around, where female hobbies support kids being around. So like working on cars, going out and playing golf, going out. And it's interesting. And then women are looked down upon having hobbies outside of the home.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to the same kind of scenario of continuing to put the home labor on women.
And we're doing things that kids can be wrapped around us.
Yeah.
Well, and
tell me more about
it's called a
trad
grifter, and this is a trad wife that monetizes being a trad wife. Okay. So in other words, an influencer, content creator, podcaster, and so forth. So indeed, they are working.
Yeah.
And yet they are promoting both their branding, promoting and bringing up the aesthetic values of what it means to be a traditional wife. So so unfortunately it really does undermine real work that people are doing. But I think why I'm so frustrated with this is because I think I might have been an original trad grifter.
Ooh,
or trad
Tell me more.
Whatever. And when I first got out of college, I worked very hard for my degree, and it never occurred to me that I would not work because of my degree. And I love my work. And I also, honestly, my mother was a depressed housewife. I mean, it was really hard for her she was a very smart woman and she didn't get to use those skills.
Yeah, we always said she would have thrived
as like a sociologist or a numbers person. So I think out of response to her depression, I ended up going to work. And yet, after about a year or two in the corporate world, I saw that it was very difficult to both be a mother and both be a full-time working person. So I moved into the freelance world or started my own business. But it wasn't honest because most of my business was being done at 3 in the morning till noon. And then I would pick you guys up at school. I would do the school field trips. I would do all of these other things. Most of the school moms probably didn't even know I went to work that
Yes, you
morning.
masqueraded as a
I
stay-at-home
was
mom.
so tired on the school buses. I masqueraded as a stay-home mom.
Yeah.
I really did. And I did that for actually a very long
Yeah.
time, not giving myself credit
Yeah.
for the amount of monies I was making, not giving myself credit as a strong businesswoman, not even giving myself credit in front of my husband because I kept wanting to lift my husband as the breadwinner or the provider, at least in my Christian social circles. And it
So
wasn't.
that held value.
It had
in
value
circles.
in those
it held
circles.
value,
No
yeah.
one gave value to a stay-home
No.
dad or the
a
dad
working mom.
or a working mom. And so it saddens me because it really actually, I don't think I really even acknowledged it till you kids went to college.
And even
So I was working these hours that were beyond.
And we saw you
comparable.
working, but because it was again, because you were still there and available, it didn't look like the other moms who were working full-time jobs. And I think now that you're kind of bringing this up, it is interesting. Like if I dig back into the perspective of young elementary, middle school me, there is almost this taboo on the moms who did have full-time jobs.
Yeah.
And not that they were bad people, but that they were not involved, or like we could get away with things because their house would be empty after school. And so it's so interesting, again, by you not being authentic with this, what those downstream effects did in even one person, my mind, towards working women.
Well, it was it was negative towards myself. Yeah. I didn't lift myself up.
No.
I didn't give myself a voice. And it's also was confusing, I think, to you all. So, for example, I was recently at a friend's retirement party, and this friend had worked outside of the home our entire raising her kids. I was so impressed by what her kids said to her. Mom, you taught us to be empowered. They never said, Mom, you were an absent mother, because they didn't see that.
Yeah.
They said, instead, they said, Mom, you empowered us to work hard. Mom, you empowered us to be strong with our decisions. Mom, you empowered us in these ways to move forward in our lives. And so, again, I'm not trying to condemn women who are choosing to stay home, but I'm also trying, if
it's a choice, that's the point.
Yeah, but if you're staying home because you feel that your community or your husband is devaluating your contribution to the family, I think you need to think about it.
Yeah.
Because I think, number one, it is giving towards this lie.
Yeah.
Right? There isn't truth. You're not empowering yourself.
You're just
and you're also
be authentic.
Authentic. And also you're diminishing people who do have to work. There's plenty of people that have to work 3 jobs because they don't have the resources to get to choose to
clarify, Tradwives, not people stay at home.
Yeah.
The Tradwife movement is diminishing people who...
Yes, the Tradwife.
Because the Tradwife says that this is the better way. And what we're saying is the best way is when you get to make a personal empowered choice.
Yeah.
Or, again, and I know it might be those 3 jobs and that doesn't feel like a choice, but it is still a choice in the matter to be working those things. And so
Well, I think there's a couple ramifications. First of all, it hides a narrative. It undermines real work that women do. It hides
that's the biggest.
I think it hides our ability to empower
as in Tradwife
each other.
movement.
Tradwife movement. Thank you. Yeah, you're right, because that's what I'm talking about here. This Tradwife movement, or the incongruity of, like, if you're truly a Tradwife, and not a trad grifter. Maybe what I'm talking about is more the inconsistency of these trad grifters. They're making money off of being a trad.
Well, I think there's several layers.
Yeah.
I think the Tradwife movement is frustrating in general because, again, it moves away from empowering women and removing choice from a lot of women.
Yeah.
It also, then the second layer is the Tradwife grifters who are kind of reinforcing this movement and leading this movement.
Yeah.
And the inauthenticity
It's
there.
almost like they're snake oil salesmen, aren't they?
Well, I mean, a little bit in the sense, because I think you bring up an interesting point. Some of I know I've read in the past that some of, like, the number one reason women don't leave domestic violence situations is because they don't have independent resources.
Yeah.
They don't have their own income. They don't have independent resources. And so they stay in domestic violence. And now I'm not trying to say that all tradwives are domestic violence. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying women who don't have independent income or independent resources more often find themselves in domestic violence situation, and then more often cannot leave those. And so what these grifters are doing, these Tradwife grifters, is they have their own independent income source. They have their own independent resources.
Have the benefits of feminism, right? Because that was feminism actually was the space that gave us choice. My mom didn't have that choice.
No.
And so she had a lot of depression.
She couldn't get a credit
around that situation. Yeah. There was something else I want to say too. I think the other thing isn't setting us up. Well, this language of subservient, right? Because I think for generations, we've been really working towards relationships to be in partnership.
Yeah.
And yes, we know sometimes someone has to lift a little bit more weight at times. Everything's not always equal, but there's a partnership in these relationships. So are we losing that language because we're saying we're going to be subservient, right? That feels dangerous. It doesn't feel whole. We're not meant to be slaves.
Yeah.
We're meant to bring ourselves forward and be included in these conversations.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also the other challenge. I'm going to wrap this up. It hit the inauthenticity of being a tradwife that's working and not claiming that you're working felt very inauthentic to me.
And close to home, though. I mean, it's a reflection as someone who used to portray
and made the mistake of not being honest with my language.
Yeah.
But I also think our not being honest with our language sets us up for this practice of, if we're saying justice work is all about truth, clarity, specificity,
sitting in discomfort,
sitting in the unknown, maybe breaking away from some of the social norms that we think are right or acceptable. It allows us to live still in that trap instead of calling it out. Anyways, that was my curiosity today. Thank you for hearing me out, Janelle.
So what is our reflection for next week?
Well, I think
mine is, how can you find a woman in your life and empower her? What is one tangible step you can do to help empower someone, woman in your life? Is it shopping at her business? Is it encouraging the things that she's going after in her life?
Is it calling out how hard she works?
Yeah. How can you empower another female in your life?
Yeah. Good. I'm going to do it. That'll be my reflection too, because that is the point of this conversation.
That's the point. It's supposed to be everyone's reflection.
You're right. But that is the point of my conversation. I'm uncomfortable with the movement that isn't being in truth and isn't the trad movement and isn't empowering women to, if they're authentically making that choice, that's one thing. But if they're working their butts off and they're not getting credit, then that makes me sad.
Yeah.
It really does.
Get it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparked something in you, whether it's a reflection, a new question, or a deeper commitment to showing up with empathy and accountability. If you found this episode meaningful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, everyone, for October, we're asking you to just introduce us to 3 of your friends. We love that, so we can share and spread the conversation with more people. You can also connect with us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Substack, or whitewomenwakeup.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, be open, and let's keep waking up.
Bye.